Well, my parents died. Happens to all of us, I suppose, if you're lucky. They were old too, so I'm not too torn up about it. They lived happy lives together and died a mere 3 hours apart from one another. Still though, losing both parents in the same day, it's always gonna hurt. Those final goodbyes, the ones where you know that this is it. Yeah, that's the hardest part. It makes all the memories come rushing back, forces your brain to run through every moment that it could. Recall being with that person, feeling mom's leathery, wrinkled hand wrapped so tightly around mine as she looked up at me with her old, beautiful brown eyes. I couldn't help but be brought back to childhood. She and dad would walk side by side, with me in the middle, and they'd take each of my hands into one of theirs. I'll never forget the joy I'd feel when they'd swing me back and forth as we walked. I just felt so warm and at peace. I'd never had any siblings. I guess they just decided one was enough. I can't say that affected me much, though. I mean, if anything, it meant more attention for me. Didn't have to share a room, didn't have to share a Christmas, and my birthday always felt like the most important day of the year. As I recollected, I could feel my mother's grip on my hand soften, and her eyes began to flutter. What followed was the monotonous beep of a heart monitor, then silence, broken only by nurses doing their jobs. Mom was gone, and dad was fading quickly behind her. Literal soulmates. Seeing dad in the state that he was in triggered more of those childhood memories, and my face became drenched in tears as I held his hand tightly. As the hours passed, eventually it seemed as though he wanted to speak, but what came out was merely a gasping wheeze that looked like it physically pained him. He looked quietly devastated at my tears, and I assumed he just wanted to reassure me that everything would be all right. He lifted a weak finger towards a shelf at the far end of his room. "The shelf?" I asked, in a quaking voice. With a smile, he shook his head. "Yes," and I walked over to the shelf. All that was there was a clipboard, clamping down some of printer paper, as well as a pen that sat beside it. I picked it up, and dad began to try and speak again, urging me to bring him the clipboard. I kind of cocked an eyebrow at this, but this was a man in his dying moments. I'm not gonna tell my dad. No, especially not now. With shaking hands, he began to write. It was heartbreaking, seeing the pen tremble in his grasp as he struggled to write a single sentence. Slowly but surely, the words were etched into the page. "Take care." Suddenly, my dad stopped. His face winced and curled into a pained expression as his heart monitor began to beep rapidly. "Dad, no," I begged. "Please, you can't leave me just yet, Dad. I'm begging you. Please, God, not yet." His eyes rolled over to meet mine, and a single tear crawled down the right side of his face as the heart monitor stretched out its final beep, and nurses filled the room once again. And that was that. Mom was gone. Dad was gone. Yet, here I was, still alive, and forced to endure. I took Dad's paper. I saw it as his final goodbye. "Take care, Donovan." That had to have been what he was trying to say. "Everything will be okay," his voice called out in my head. Leaving the hospice room felt like my shoes were cinder blocks, and the walk to the exit seemed to take an eternity. I got in by car, feeling empty, a void in my soul that couldn't be filled again. But alas, life must go on. I had funerals to arrange. There was a bit of a shining light in the darkness, though, and that shining light came in the shape of my inheritance. It feels wrong, now that I'm thinking about it, finding consolation in getting money because my parents died. But if they left it to me, it was mine. Over the course of their lives, my parents had purchased 3 properties, one here in town, a lake house, a few cities over, and a 2-story townhouse back in their home state. At least, I thought it was 3. Apparently, they'd also owned a cabin up in the mountains about 50 or so miles out of town. They'd left each property to me, and from the very moment I found out, I made a quick decision that I was going to be definitely moving into that lake house for permanent residence. What? I deserve it. My parents died. Anyway, I'd never even heard them mention a cabin once in my entire life. Dad would take monthly hunting trips out to that area, though, so I guess that's where it came from. It took me a few weeks to get out there and take a look at the place. What with all the funeral arrangements and time it takes to want to even leave your bed after the death of a loved one, but I got out there nevertheless. Let me just say, the place was absolutely decrepit. I knew it had been a while since my dad had gone hunting, but this place looked like it hadn't been touched in years. It was completely desolate. and vegetation had covered the entire front side of the cabin. The boards at the back looked like they were set to collapse at any given moment. A rickety porch swing lay on the front porch, suspended on one side by the chain that hadn't snapped yet. Pushing the door open, what hit me first was the smell. That sickly sweet smell of death that you'd find radiating off a decaying deer carcass on the side of the road. It ran through the front door and sucker punched me in the face, completely unexpectedly, covering 90% of my face with my shirt. The next thing I noticed that knocked the wind out of me were the toys. Dozen of toys that were very clearly made for little boys, no older than toddler age. So this is where Dad brought you. I thought aloud as I noticed one of my favorite teddy bears from when I was a kid. I searched for you for months, little Huckleberry. What I noticed next is what made me realize that something was incredibly wrong. Aside from my little Huckleberry, I didn't recognize any of these toys. I have a pretty strong memory. I think I'd remember at least some of this stuff. But no, I didn't recognize the clothes either. None of these 10 or so outfits that, by this point, had been tattered and weathered to shreds. They all just lay randomly sprawled across the floor of the cabin, covered in dirt and grime. As I explored further into the cabin, the smell of rot became more and more present until, finally, I found its source. In a huge pile in the corner of the kitchen area were dozens of rodent carcasses, possums, squirrels, raccoons. They all looked like they had been completely mutilated. I stared at the disgusting pile until something hit me like a freight train. The possum at the very top of this pile. It looked fresh. Blood still trickled from what looked like a bite mark on its neck, and its feet twitched. All at once the smell and gore became too much, and I began to get dizzy. I leaned over into the sink and started puking my guts up, shivering from the force. In between my heaves, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. And that possum pretty much confirmed it for me. I felt my senses heighten in that raw, primal way. The kind of primal that helps a gazelle escape the crushing force of a crocodile, bite before it can even happen. My ears perked up at the slightest foreign sound, and that sound just so happened to be the creaking of the wooden floors in the cabin. Ever so slowly, I turned to where the sound was coming from, peeking its head into the doorway. Staring at me with this disgusting, childlike grin was something that I could barely classify as human.